Chat. Uh-oh. You- You're, you're hearing a side of the VTubers that I usually don't play on stream. You know, but I like this song, I can't help it. I like this song too, god damn it. Ah! What's up, chat? Hey, damn. I like this song so much. I'm vibing. Oh, I just realized it's a cover. Chat room. It's Sunday. I'm a little tired. I'm a little tired. All right? I can't lie. I've been reading a lot. I've been reading a lot about Dragon's Dogma. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I was vibing out. Vibing out and my throat. I'm coughing a little bit. Give me a second. All right, chat. Yes, I'm ready. Gonna have to take it easy on the throat for right now. But let's shift up the vibe. Uh-huh. You know what? Maybe we should listen to Dragon's Dogma music. How about that? I almost typed in Dragon OST. Oh dear God. what, what could have appeared if we did that? I don't know. Let's go to Dragon's Dogma's soundtrack. How about that? That sounds cool. Oh, there is a Dark Arisen soundtrack as well. Ooh. Okay, let's do that because I'm maybe familiar with that and not the other one actually. Maybe. Oh, well that didn't start at the beginning of the song at all. Just this guy's. We're going to this guy's. Actually, I'm so sorry, chat. This is gonna be too intense for what we're reading. Swees! Hey man, welcome. It's good to see you as always. You know, I think actually I think I asked you this once before, but the 719 in your name, it doesn't mean anything, right? I think one time we were all talking about our names, and I was like, I wonder what that means. No, it means nothing. He's a madman. Medieval. We gotta put on our medieval music. We were just about to get into it. Squeeze. I know that the name without numbers wasn't available. Damn. I can't believe there's 718 other Sweezes out there. Incredible. Chat room. I understand the game. Oh, it might sound like I was trying to speak fake Spanish there, but I was just copying Shiori. Copying VTubers as usual. um, are you ready? Here we go. Yeah. Wait, hold on. I did a preemptive hiya. Okay. Yeah. Bad news, we're going to Reddit. Good news. This guy isn't a dribbling crazy no evidence posting weird opinion having gamer. He is the opposite. The one we love to see, the long paragraph, many links and other evidence, and kindly offers theories while saying they could be wrong gamer. Their name is apparently Lenarius. So, first of all, I'll salute Lenarius in chat as well. I will salute for them. But yes, we're starting with Reddit. Nice. That is a good emote. He even looks happy to be there. His 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 paper is as big as his pencil, so either he has a very small piece of paper or a huge pencil. But yes, so I debated whether or not we should just this this will be a long discussion, by the way. Well, I'm going to try to make it quick, but it's a very in-depth discussion. So, there's your heads up. Clearly, for anyone lurking VOD watchers, future VOD watchers, huge Dragon's Dogma spoilers. Like, the biggest spoilers you could imagine of any stream I've ever done. This is the one with the most spoilers, so get out of here if you are worried. If that makes you worried, get out of here. Alright, they're gone. So, yes, I wasn't sure if we should read this guy's thing or not, but I feel like it's really important for us to have the same kind of knowledge, chat. So I read this guy's stuff, and at first I was like, yeah, most of this makes sense, but yeah, you're kind of sprinkling in some of your own stuff, which just try not to do that, right? You try to keep it factual, but the more I thought about it, the more I do think there is a point to a lot of it. So we're not going to read his first post because his first post was saying, I actually didn't even read it either. The second post, and the most important thing out of all of this, is that there were translation changes, errors that didn't make it to the English version of the game, which would affect our understanding, aka we stood no chance of understanding what the story was going to be. No chance. I don't remember if he talks about it in this post as well. I think he does. But the biggest news from that is that King Rothias, the Beastren first king of Vermund, or Vernworth, is the Seneschal. We know this because something, something, something in the Japanese game, he literally says the words himself. So it makes sense. I mean, it's supposed to make sense because that he gives us the God's Bane. But my whole thing was it didn't come out of his chest. His chest glowed, but it didn't come out of his chest. Maybe that's just a small detail that other people don't care about. I'm still bothered by that, but whatever. Point is, he is the Seneschal, aka the god of the world. And he himself, basically, we'll get to it a lot later, but, you know, he was up in heaven. He was like, wait a second. I feel like I can feel something. He's like, it's the watching one, right? That's who he could feel, the Pathfinder. He called it the watching one. He was like, fuck this. And he went back down to Earth and then tried to find him. And yada 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 got sealed away at the bottom of the ocean. So before I go any farther, let's keep reading. So here's his little introduction. I'm probably gonna say his. Don't know for real. Apologies if not his or he. Just a bad habit of speaking. But their opinion, their little introduction, and then we get into some basics. So, what is the cycle? The story of Dragon's Dogma 1 is displaying one turn of the cycle from beginning to its end. The cycle in the first game is a casual loop that plays out constantly throughout the world's history. A dragon is born from the rift. It terrorizes humanity until a worthy human resists the dragon, displaying a strong will to live and fight. The dragon selects this human by stealing their heart, stopping their body's aging, and tying their fate directly with the dragon and the cycle. This human is known as an Arisen. Right? No problem so far. Also, stop me if there's any questions. Maybe I'll try to start paraphrasing instead of read. If I read everything word for word, this is gonna take forever. We know that the Arisen is tasked with hunting down the dragon. It has to kill them to get their heart back. If left unchecked, the dragon threatens to destroy the land. That's kind of true, but also kind of not true. They don't just destroy everything. After many battles and side quests, the Arisen will confront the dragon and be offered a choice: offer up their love, and the dragon will go away, or stand and fight him. Whenever you fight him and defeat him, you get rewarded with their heart and a foreboding warning from the dragon, and also the God's Bane blade, because we know we got it. We got it whenever we defeated the dragon in DD1. Oops, sorry. Alright. The dragon says that his defeat's not the end, but just the beginning. That's when the Everfall opened up in DD1. It was a physical world, a physical place that connects to all the other worlds. And that's where you're supposed to train in order to get strong enough to go and fight the Seneschal, aka God. So, you battle and prove yourself able to get there. That's when we learn that the Seneschal is the source of the world's will, the will being the driving force and sustaining all of life. And and that, you know, it's a finite resource from the current Seneschal, and they must be replaced by a new Arisen. And we know that if you die against the Seneschal, you become a dragon, and we'll talk more about that later as well. But of course, all of this test, you know, resisting the dragon's deal, blah blah blah, fighting him, fighting the Seneschal, and resisting his deal as well, all proves that you're strong enough, strong-willed enough to carry on the true cycle, is what we're gonna end up starting to call it, right? Okay. So, to break the cycle, so they start talking about breaking the cycle, which is a really big theme of the game, and I probably will read this part word for word because totally agree. It says they, along with every other English Reliant speaking player, Assume that the two story is about breaking the endless chain and seeing what the world outside of what it of that would look like. The end of the game is constantly barraging the player with dialogue suggesting they should break the cycle. The dragon explicitly tells you, nearly begs you, to break the cycle. And in fact, breaking the cycle is so in your face that the first line of the dragon's monologue seems to tell you that you desire to dismantle the world's will. And I totally, he says, yeah. They say, yeah, we get it. Yeah, we get it. Totally agree. Totally makes sense. I feel like there's a lot of examples where they're talking about that, but we're probably about to get to them here in a second. My mind is a bit cluttered and clouded with all of this stuff. It's been a while since I've read this, but they're saying that there's some translation issues that will help us understand that the problem that this world faces isn't with the existence of the cycle. It's in fact something else. It's not that we have Capcom. It's it's a weird. Some of the translations I can see how they would say it like that, but some of it is like, yeah, wait, that changes stuff. So, uh, okay, maybe it will be best if I read it word for word, chat. So, in the English version of the Pathfinder's explanation of the universe and the birth of the cycle, they state, okay, and by the way, the Pathfinder is the big dragon, definitely. He turns into the dragon. I kind of don't believe that people can create dragons, but I think that people can transform into dragons, which you might say is the same thing, but it's kind of like how Seven turned into a dragon. Um, it's like he turned into one with his willpower, literal willpower. Anyways, in the English version, he says, "Time has seen worlds uncountable created, only to be snuffed out like candles by the cold breath of oblivion. Eventually, the great will grew tired of witnessing this. It sought to overturn oblivion by granting unto it a role, a duty, an identity. I speak of the dragon." So in this, and they kind of go on to say, I don't know if I necessarily agree, but they go on to say, that this is confusing and it sounds like it sought to overturn oblivion by granting unto it a role. So it feels like it's saying it took oblivion and it gave it a duty and identity. Speak of the dragon, that it turned the dragon, oblivion into the dragon, like the concept of time ending, death, etc., etc., kind of turn it into the dragon, which doesn't really. It's like, what the heck? What are you talking about? In the Japanese version, it says, "A cycle that has repeated countless times, a world is born and then erased by nothingness. Eventually, a will that fought against nothingness was born. That will obtained a role, that of dragon." So in this, it sounds like it's like, so the cycle has repeated countless times, world is born and then erased. Times have seen countless worlds uncountable created, only to be snuffed out by candles. Everything's the same so far. There's a world, it dies. It comes back, it dies. It comes back, and it dies. Eventually, something out there was strong enough to say, I'm tired of this. Eventually, a will fought against the nothingness was born. Eventually, the great will grew tired of witnessing this, right? So it's still saying the same thing, like this thing that we're going to start calling the great will is like, hey, this is fucked up. I don't like how everything keeps dying and starting over again and again and again. But yeah, this last line is where it gets confusing. So that will obtain the role, that of the dragon. But why? Yeah. So the original Japanese text clearly explains that the first dragon was a will so powerful that it was able to be born and survive even in the depths of oblivion. The English mistranslation can cause the player to falsely assume that if the dragon is oblivion taken form, the cycle is a tool of oblivion and must be ended, because the dragon is the one that is causing this thing to never ever end. I think is what they're trying to say. Well, let's look at the following lines to see if the mistranslation pattern continues. By the great will does the dragon create a cycle, allowing it to forestall the end of this world time and time again. Yes, Arisen, this world has been safeguarded by the dragon all along. You yourself were chosen to form a part of this cycle. The Arisen is selected by the great will to play the role of the dragon's counterpart. In the Japanese, dragon, through great will, caused flux and nothingness, slowing down annihilation. That's right, the world you know of exists because it had been protected by dragon. The awakened, Arisen, is an existence that was chosen by great will to be a foil to dragon. So, really, I went back and forth on this kind of thing and been absorbing it all. To me, the TLDR is that it's just really not so clear from the English version, like how the Great Will, what the Great Will did at the beginning of time, and like they're saying what the problem with all of what's going on is. So, if we're going by what the Japanese version says, the dragon, through great will, caused the flux and nothingness, slowing down annihilation. So, the great will, through the dragon, caused something, right, to slow down the annihilation, the whole cycle of the world is born and everything dies. The world is born and everything dies. This great will, using the dragon, has done something to slow that down. And that slow that down are the cycles, which we'll get to. This goes on. This is his conversation with another guy in a translation Reddit, where he's talking about the existence of the Great Will, which we've already been talking about. The Great Will, which created itself. It's just kind of something you just kind of have to accept. And the fact that there is something called, that they start calling oblivion, they start referencing it, like as if it's a character. So it is kind of safe to do the same, but it refers to a lot of things, like the end of the world, but also a world without inspiration and hope and emotions, etc., etc. But we know that Great Will exists because he literally said, I exist. And we know that Oblivion exists because the world always ends and then starts over, even without any interference from any dragons or any cycles or anything. Okay. So let me keep reading here. Da-da. Just talking about how, just kind of going over a little bit what I said, a little bit about the Ur-Dragon and what they think is how the universe started. They go on to say, there is one other difference in translation I want to draw attention to, as it will be very important later in this post. The quote caused flux and nothingness, slowing down annihilation, is in place of the English version's creation of a cycle. I'll come back to later to that. This is where the English translation goes completely off the rails and changes the entire meaning of the true ending. In the English version, it says, that is how the world's built. The dragon serves to continue the cycle, and the Arisen exists to oppose it. This is the true meaning of the dragon's dogma, right? So this kind of goes back to what they were saying earlier about the game seems framed around breaking the cycle. That is how the world is like. This is what the end of the game, Pathfinder, dialogue is saying. That is how the world is built. The dragon serves to continue the cycle, and the Arisen exists to oppose it. That is the true meaning of the dragon's dogma. Really, what they mean is exists to oppose it. It, as in the dragon, like in the cycle. But it does sound like it means to oppose the dragon serving to continue the cycle. Um, and then I felt very validated whenever they said a few times like it felt like that they totally changed how the world works and they got rid of the the complex story of one and blah blah blah. I was like, oh, I feel seen. But these are the lines in Japanese. This circular cycle between dragon and arisen constructed this world. That is Dragon's Dogma. So it's like it maybe sounds like a small change, but it's um to me, which we'll get to later, is that it's really like a positive message. This circular cycle between the dragon and the arisen constructed this world, as in not necessarily the end of the apocalyptic end of the world, but the overall true progress of the world. Okay, so let me see. Actually, now that I think about it, I have already said some of this stuff, like about the Sinistral and whatnot. This is when they're talking about how we know King Ruthius is the Sinistral. We will come back to keep reading it. Okay, I'll read it. I'll read it. Where was it? Where were we? Just here. Okay. As I mentioned in my translation post, King Ruthius is confirmed to be the Sinistral in the original Japanese. However, he's in an extremely different situation than Savan was in our first game. If some players were looking for the title Sinistral in Dragon's Dogma 2, you won't find it. Why is that? It appears the English localization did not reference the lexicon from DD1. And then this is what this other guy named Sushi Enjoyer 12 says about how they understand, that it's the word Sinistral. In Japanese DD1, the Sinistral title is actually something something. Kaio, maybe. You might also know that title from Dragon Ball. These two kanji put together without context can easily be translated as World King. So when I read the English lines, I was instantly very suspicious. Just throw the kanji into Deep L, for example, and you will get King of the World. So I found the Japanese DD2 scene on YouTube since I didn't want to replay the whole game, and the first sovereign does indeed directly state that he felled the dragon, founded his country, and that he then continued on even further to become a two kanji, aka Sinistral. It's not even implied. The Japanese script literally states this. And I guess they don't show it, but in the English game, he does say that he became the king of the world, or that he says something like his kingdom was, stretched across the world, etc., etc. I saw someone else said that they thought that meant that he was simply ruling every country. That's what I thought too. But really what they meant was that he was literally God. I So, small difference there, but pretty big difference. Because then you think, wait a second. If you're here, why are you here? Why are you in underwater hell? And like, what's going on? Right, and that's actually the point that they were getting to. Now, this is a quote from King Ruthius. I do think it sounds pretty badass. I am he who brought the dragon low, and o'er its bones raised the proud kingdom of Vermund. So he's saying, I killed the dragon. I thought that this meant that he um, took the dragon's deal. I think I might have thought that at one point, but no, clearly not, because he killed it. Um, yes, so I believe that in order to fully appreciate the story of Dragon's Dogma 2, we need to understand King Matthias' story. As the most pivotal character, the story cannot occur without his actions, and this is super true. According to the story, a former seneschal, King Matthias, had a will so incredibly powerful that he could perceive a hidden presence while performing the duties of seneschal. He named this other presence the Watching One, and realized that his actions and choices were observed by this presence. He believes that all his hard-won victories were just a spectacle to some far-removed watcher. Definitely remember that. We definitely remember um, him complaining, him, expressing that, complaining about that. He threw a fit, and then he came down to Earth. Well, to the physical world. In response, he used his powerful will to take his throne to the mortal plane and refused to perpetuate the cycle further. However, even while ruling over the kingdom he founded after the dragon's defeat, his paranoia of the Watching One would continue to haunt him and cause him to kill any mortals close to him for fear that they were the eyes and ears of the Watching One. The world branded him a mad king due to this, and had Arisen sealed him in the seafloor shrine for his actions. There, Arisen would continue to challenge him for the throne of Seneschal and fall to his powerful will. So, before we get to this next huge question of how are Arisen still appearing, because I do, this is when, no, absolutely no offense to this person, thank them incredibly, and I don't know how to thank them. I did think about responding as potential way to thank them, give them some things to think about, but yes, before we get to this big question of how are Arisen still appearing, we definitely need to keep in mind how strong King Matthias truly is. It's not that he's just a seneschal, he was like the seneschal before, um, or I mean, there have been many, 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 many Arisen currently alive that have challenged him, and because he's the first king of Vermund, I don't know how many kings or how long that's been, but presumably he has been the seneschal for a long time, and also that's why he, when the Unmoored Land, which is um, post-game apocalyptic land, the Unmoored Land, he actually fades away and dies at the end. So very, 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 very strong, but at this point, old. So now they're going to switch gears and start talking about the Watching One, aka the Pathfinder, but in the Japanese game, he's called Guide, which I think's very interesting because Pathfinder to me doesn't necessarily mean like that they're doing anything. It just, to me, it means like that they're looking, kind of like the Watching One, but a guide is totally like more hands-on. But anyways, actually that might be what they're talking about here, the definitions. But enter the Watching One, aka Pathfinder or Guide. The Pathfinder is a higher authority than the Seneschal. Just as the Seneschal's position is to perpetuate the cycle of the world, the Watching One's position is to ensure the Seneschal carries out their duties by watching over the world and monitoring its progress. Where the Watching One came from, I'm still not sure. That is a mystery. Does the Watching One exist? Absolutely yes, 100 trillion %, because we see them, and they are an entity outside of the typical cycle players that we know of, aka Dragon, Seneschal, Arisen. It is likely that every world in the Dragon's Dogma multiverse has a Watcher, just as they have a Seneschal. It is also likely that the Watcher is appointed by either the Ur-Dragon or the Great Will at the birth of each world cycle, and to speculate further, the Watcher may even be a piece of the Ur-Dragon's will left behind to ensure the world runs correctly. No comment on that stuff because it's just speculation, but I mean, it's fun to think about, I guess. Point is that they definitely exist. That's you know, something we can't deny, so we need to think about what they're doing and why, etc. However, they go on to say that the Pathfinder is no longer fulfilling the role of the Watcher, rather they are now selfishly fulfilling the role of guide. I don't I think that the translation differences aren't really a clue. It's more just that the Pathfinder is absolutely a corrupt individual. We have plenty of evidence that we will get to, but the first sign, and I'm going to give myself a pat on the back / a dose of copium, the first sign is that he helps us escape from prison. If he were testing our will and whatnot, he would not help us in any way. That invalidates our test. So that to me is the biggest sign that something is wrong with what's going on with the cycle. Well, that's the biggest sign that the Pathfinder, aka the watching one, is no longer watching, right? He is active. And how can they be sure they're doing the right thing? So, at this point, we know that King Rathias is not doing his central job. He's in underwater hell, being upset. With King Rathias' absence, the duties of the Central go unfulfilled and the cycle cannot be perpetuated. If the cycle fails to continue, a new Central cannot be found, and the world will begin to stagnate until all the world's will is lost. Even Rathias' powerful will cannot last forever. At the end of the game, our Arisen finds Rathias' withered form, who openly admits that he is a fading spirit. I interpret this as Rathias abandoning the Seneschal duties. However, he is unable to truly detach himself from the world. Even while abandoning the cycle, Rathias is still a Seneschal and has no choice but to supply the world with will. However, his will has nearly run dry, so he cannot sustain the world indefinitely. The Watcher realizes that Rathias has abandoned his duty to the cycle and decides to take the position and duties of the Seneschal for their own. I don't know if there's really hard proof of this, but I don't really know if it matters, and we'll get to that later. The fact that the Watcher may or may not have officially become the Seneschal. Don't know how to prove if that's true, but also don't know if it needs to be, since the Watching One is an entity you could consider higher than the Seneschal. AKA, if we kill the Pathfinder, we can definitely be the Seneschal. Also, timeout, two things. One, I can't, but the game actually ended in this chain of dominoes of weird prediction timings. The game actually ended with me stabbing the Pathfinder and killing him, just like I wanted. That makes me happy. and two, I was mad about dying on the wings twice. But then I remembered we died so many times trying to run away in that hallway in Dragon's Dogma 1 that I was like, God damn it, it's just like the same thing. I'm cursed. I'm cursed for cool moments to be ruined by weird deaths. All right. Anyways. Sorry. So, the Watcher realizes Rathias abandoned his duty and decides to take the duties and position of Seneschal for their own. The first task of the Pathfinder, cursed aka skill issue. No! Oh, God. The devs are something. Yeah, and if they have a certain weight encumbrance and certain height, that just can't beat this last part. I'm getting one guide, guys. Don't let them do it. Don't let them distract me from our important lesson here. Okay. So, the first task of the Pathfinder, who is now acting like the Seneschal, whether or not he is, right? Which is already bad. The Pathfinder, aka watching one, is no longer watching. The first thing they want to do is get rid of King Rathias, whose refusal to perpetuate the cycle halts the casual loop that the cycle was formed from. Rathias refuse. You have to agree that part was kind of bad design. Yeah, it's more like, it's like, if you want to do this cool stuff, cool, but like there should be like a failsafe in case, like, I don't know, maybe add some more spikes at the bottom of his wing, you know? I don't know. Or like I was pressing E as well, which is the grab button. I thought I would just like turn around and grab onto him, like any other monster. Or maybe I could. I don't know. Maybe it was still something I didn't do right. I don't know. Um, make it that you have to grab at the edge of the wing. Yeah, that could have worked too. It was just really weird. And then later I went and read the game over message, and it basically is like, yep, that's the end. Um, unless you like want to try again, or you could just give up automatically if you fail it. Yeah, that could work too. You know, that could be nice, and then it's like you just can never fail. But that feels very anti JRPG. It feels like they're like, yeah, you didn't grab onto you didn't hit the wing spike, so you're dead. Lol. Twice, by the way. Get wrecked. Skill issue. Okay, so the Pathfinder's like, grr, I gotta get rid of King Rathias. He's messing up the cycle. Um, Rathias has refused to create a dragon to find an arisen. I have my own theory about this. If there's only one option to continue, make it so the player can't die. Yeah, it's like, yeah, because then it's like, you just get this weird, you get what happened to me. There's nothing that can be done about it, but we just keep going. It's funny that that didn't happen to Psycho. You know what? At least Psycho got to see something a little different there. Rathias refuses to create a dragon to find an arisen, and so no new arisen are born to challenge him for the throne. The Pathfinder needs an arisen to kill Rathias and take his position as Seneschal. Then the Pathfinder can ensure the world will be supplied with will and continue to exist. But how can the Pathfinder use an arisen if Rathias won't start the next turn of the cycle? To solve this, the Pathfinder must create a dragon of their own. Here's where I definitely have to time out and say, I don't know if that's true or not. I could not, in my literal 10 to 20 hours of research, find if with definitive proof either way that dragons can or cannot come from other universes. I should be specific, from other individual cycles. So we have to assume it's both they can come from the same one and or come from a different one. Because we'll get to that later. We're going to get to a lot of stuff later. This is all still the intro, really. So, the Pathfinder must create a dragon of their own. The dragon. Remember, this is one of his quotes. All is preordained, even my death at thine hands. I didn't remember thinking anything about the dragon's dialogue, but I was also just it was hard to focus on it. Me, personally, because I am not smart enough for that. On my first playthrough, I was so disappointed because the dragon felt so weak to me. Although I thought the English voice actor did an incredible job, the writing of the dragon was so vastly different from the first game, I couldn't wrap my head around it. I didn't realize this at all, but totally, it totally makes sense. In Dragon's Dogma 1, Grigori is a servant of the Seneschal and a perpetuator of the cycle. He fully subscribes to the cycle and is looking for the Arisen that will prove themselves worthy of taking up the office of Seneschal and release him from his charge. How he both drives and taunts the Arisen is extremely satisfying as it leads up to the climactic battle. The dragon in the sequel is nothing like this, and I now believe it's actually for a very good reason. I'm pretty sure I rolled my eyes at that the first time I read it. I will unroll them, take it back. Who is this dragon? Is he a previous Arisen? There's no real evidence. We can only assume he is, based off the rules of the first game cycle, but in Dragon's Dogma 2, the cycle is not as it should be. King Rathias has refused to perpetuate the cycle. When a new Arisen challenges him for the throne, he does not test their will, but instead kills them. The death of the Arisen at this moment in the true cycle would have them serve the Seneschal, turning into a dragon, and being tasked with finding the next Arisen. However, this world is no longer in the true cycle, as King Rathias has rejected the duties of Seneschal. Instead, he leaves the bodies of the Arisen to rot. The only thing remaining of these arisen is their strong wills, which are solidified into crystal form. These crystals are eventually swept out to sea to land on the shores of Batal. So that's kind of like a oh yes, it's starting to make sense. Things are all the little pieces we just talked about, they're lining up now. And starting to mentionings of things like the true cycle and whatnot, which I will lay out for us a bit more plainly later. But I I feel as if, I mean, it might be like a technicality because he's not in heaven, quote unquote, that when they die, they don't turn into dragons because they're supposed to fall out of the sky. Or it could just be, I think it's more that King Rathias doesn't want them to turn into dragons, and so when he kills them, they just die because that's what he wills. Which sounds kind of funny to think it's like, because I told you so, kind of an answer, but this game has, it's like all about willpower. This game has some of that, like, that's because they were strong enough to make that happen. So I could see that King Rathias was just that fed up with the cycle that he was like, you know, I'm not, that's not happening. Yeah, he's just that strong. So because of this, the Pathfinder had to go to extreme measures in order to tell their desired story and create a cycle of their own. Um, so he hasn't. They still haven't gotten to like where the dragon has come from. We're just saying um, that it's this cycle that we're in right now with King Rathias as the Seneschal is getting worse. Right, more and more failed arisen over time, and no solution in sight. No real Seneschal in the throne. Just a Seneschal who's abandoned his duties, but is still the Seneschal because he's still supplying the world with his will. He just isn't doing his job. I believe that Pathfinder has artificially created and could be reusing the same dragon to create a Risen, and as a result, the dragon has become completely disillusioned with the world just as King Rathias has. Death at the hands of an Arisen can no longer release this dragon from the Pathfinder's servitude. Reincarnation is obviously prevalent in Dragon's Dogma, and we see the Pathfinder create versions of our friends in the true ending to try to persuade us to turn back, proving that he currently occupies the seat of the Central and can create life. I don't I totally, sorry, I disagree with this last bit. We do see that, but it's in like another weird shadow dimension. Uh, I just kind of don't believe that that what he created there was true life. I mean, was there proof of that? I think it's more important that we know that, yes, reincarnation is definitely prevalent in the game, and we know that the world itself resets. It dies and comes back, and dies and comes back. And sometimes now a cycle comes and makes the world last a little bit longer. Just long enough, just more enough will for something new to happen. And maybe that new thing that happens still kills everyone. And then we start over. And then that repeats. And this is happening kind of infinitely. Infinitely. Um, or I should say simultaneously in multiple individual cycles. But it's all contributing to an overall true cycle, aka the true progress of the world, which is a thing, I believe. I believe pretty strongly. Anyways, trying not to jump around too much. I should just keep reading. Okay, I was muted. Oops. Um. Okay, I wanted to make sure we were going to talk about what the dragon says and the dialogue differences. I think that that's in here. Maybe not. It's somewhere. Okay. The false benevolence, which is something that the dragon mentions. The dragon as in the dragon. AKA, it's unfortunate that the dragon in Dragon's Dogma 2, the one that we kill with ourselves, is just named Dragon. But we are going to call the dragon from the first game Grigori, because that is probably his name. So, false benevolence. Now that we have a better understanding of the role the Pathfinder has taken on, I want to talk about how they interpret the Pathfinder's character and how this drastically changes the meaning of the true ending. I believe the Pathfinder has misunderstood what the cycle is, and in doing so, has endangered this entire world. There are several lines from the Pathfinder that display their misunderstanding of the cycle with contradicting story points. I have my own evidence as well. Here's a great example of this. For a well-crafted tale has no excess. There must be a reason for each character's inclusion. Yet this means that should even one of these characters stray from their assigned role, the tale entire will unravel. So they argue that this can't be true because if that were happening, King Rathias abandoning his duties as a seneschal, which is a very important role in everyone's story, would have unraveled the world possibly thousands of years ago prior to the events of Dragon's Dogma 2. Because he didn't just recently abandon his role as seneschal, he gave up a long ass time ago. So they're saying that if this is true, that the world would unravel if one person goes astray, that it can't be true. I also think it can't be true because the Pathfinder himself is going astray. I think that's more of what it's about. Because the tale that is unraveling is, in this case, the tale that we unwrote, or that was unwritten, the one where the world almost ended with no seneschal and a crazy watching one who's making things worse. Even if Rathias was not supplying will, we know that based on the events of Dragon's Dogma 1 that it does not instantly unravel the world, rather it does eventually drain itself and slowly fade back into oblivion. The contradiction is made even more clear in Japanese. In well-made stories, there are no meaningless characters. However, even if a single one of these characters refuses their role, the story falls apart. It would mean the end of the world. Pathfinder's explanation of how the world functions is an attempt to fool the player into believing that all worlds functions under the same set of rigid story rules. They begin by giving the player a reveal of how the cycle was originally born across all worlds. And this is the original Japanese dialogue for accuracy. A cycle has repeated countless times. A world is born and then erased by nothingness. Eventually, a will that fought against nothingness was born. That will obtained a role, that of Dragon. Dragon, through great will, caused flux in nothingness, slowing down annihilation. That's right, the world you know of exists because it had been protected by Dragon. The Arisen is an existence that was chosen by great will to be a foil to Dragon. This circular cycle between Dragon and Arisen constructed this world. That is Dragon's Dogma. After this reveal of the true Dragon's Dogma, the Pathfinder shifts from the subject of the universal model to the cycle the Pathfinder has crafted. In the past, everyone had a role. The past refers to before the unmoored world. In well-made stories, there are no meaningless characters. However, if a single character refuses their role, the story falls apart. It would mean the end of the world. This is the road that you have chosen, Arisen. Everyone's role is on the verge of returning to nothing because of your choices. Personally, I think it was very clever and a deceptive way to structure a monologue spoken by the antagonist. They first build trust with the player by giving him a deeper look outside of the cycle and its true origins. Then moments later, they attempt to trick you by implying that all worlds must follow the rules of the story, and characters must adhere to their roles, otherwise must be destroyed. However, this cannot be true. Again, not sure how much I agree one-to-one with what they're saying, but I definitely agree that there are signs that the Pathfinder is not is not the neutral watching one that they are meant to be. Okay. The Pathfinder has misunderstood what the cycle is, and we can see this using the only other world we can reference, which I'm not sure what they mean by that. I think that they mean in Dragon's Dogma 1, because we see how the cycle is meant to go. But moving on into mirrored themes, aka Volition versus Fate. I'm going to be honest. This whole section I can reduce to a few sentences. No offense to this person. Even though it is really cool about the quest, their point with all of this, well, at least with this first section, is that in Dragon's Dogma 1, there were a lot of quests, even little side quests, where you had many options with different results, different quest endings. In the example, this one quest, A Troublesome Tome, you have 3 options to get the book, but if you take one option within that, there's another quest which has 2 options within that, within those 2 options, there's one option with 2 options within that. And then when you finally get the book, you have another choice to give him the real one or a fake one. So there's 8 separate choices that you can make just for like one side quest, which is pretty substantial, and there were definitely other quests like that, although admittedly I can't name them. In Dragon's Dogma 2, their point is that a lot of the quests are a lot of the quests are either pass or fail. Either you help that person or they die. And we make sure I'm not skipping ahead then. The quest design of choices and changing outcomes happens constantly in Dragon's Dogma 1 and is driven home by the Dragon's Bargain in the final confrontation with Grigori, a final choice that will change the outcome of the story, your lover for a kingdom or a battle with the dragon. Grigori himself has several lines of dialogue reminding the player of the theme of the world and motif of this franchise, that even though the world needs a cycle to survive, the cycle is perpetuated by the choices of the Arisen, not some grand destiny or fate. Okay? I hope that he talks about... We may have to end up coming back to this section, but pay very close attention. This is what, to the wording, this is what Grigori in Dragon's Dogma 1 said to us when we approached him to fight him. So, kind of, yeah, anyways. Remembering that Grigori was subscribed to the cycle, he is a proponent of it, aka he supports it. The choice falls not to me, nor to the whims of fate. It is yours alone. Though I called you here to me, it was ever your own feet, that your own will that brought you. And now again, the choice is yours, Arisen. This is not fate nor duty's call. This battle is your own, waged of your own free will. And once you choose to fight him, your choice is made, Arisen. As you have willed it, so shall it be. And once you defeat him, Arisen, you have earned back what is yours. Your life belongs now to no other. You've won it by rights. It is yours to use or cast away as you see fit. Remember that. What really cements the feeling of free will is what comes after your battle with Grigori. You're given the freedom to explore a newly haunted world and take as much time as you would like in the Everfall. It is your choice to decide when to complete the final game and ascend to Seneschal. Whether the player spends 1 hour or 100 hours makes no difference. It is your freedom to choose. Even in the post-game, does Dragon's Dogma 1 allow you to express your free will? Which I do agree with that, and will, instead of pointing out the side quest option differences, would rather point out the ending option differences, wherein we had multiple physical choices to make, where we could choose to save our beloved or fight Grigori. We could choose to live a life of peace and run away from the Sinestral or fight him then. We had a moment where the Pathfinder was tempting us with Ulrika and the Shadow people and said, you know, won't you come with us? And we wiped them away. We didn't get a choice for that. I was kind of mad about that. I would say that definitely is more points towards DD1's theme of free will than a side quest having some options. Because to me, that could also just be a thing of older game design. Or maybe it's more that modern game design only has less options. That's probably more accurate. So, their point of, even in the post-game, does DD1 allow you to express your free will? After choosing how to proceed, the player is once again given the final choice of the battle against Sinestral. Okay, yeah, I just said that. Oops. DD1's story is often ridiculed for having a large gap between this beginning story and the final confrontation. A common complaint is made that the quests in between the inciting incident and the final confrontation are basically pointless to the story. The player is expected to play side quest simulator until the dragon reappears and reminds you that you have to fight him, and that your confrontation will not be affected by these quests. Their point is that that's not necessarily a bad thing, that it just means that you have the free will to do whatever you wish. And that the overall point is that the cycle doesn't need a set of choices to complete itself. Instead, it thrives on any and all choices made within it each time it turns. Which goes against what the Pathfinder is saying, that everybody has a role to play, and if you deviate from it, you know, it's no good. We know that everybody's universes in Dragon's Dogma 1 are all canon, at least in some degree, because we have each other's pawns. Same in Dragon's Dogma 2. There's no way we all made the same choices. I mean, definitely not. And yet, the world still exists. So, they weren't instantly unraveled, right? In contrast, DD2's world, ruled by the Pathfinder, is the opposite in early aspect. It creates a mirror image of the first game's themes. Rather than a world forged and fueled by the choices made by the Arisen, we see a rigid world structure whose characters are desperate to free themselves from a repressive cycle. You've probably noticed that most of the longer side quest chains have a theme of breaking out of a restricting cycle in order to gain control and freedom. This is also reinforced through gameplay. There are almost no real choices to be made in these stories other than to succeed or fail or do nothing. Here are some examples. And he talks about how Sven, you have to help him, you know, go from spoiled boy to able-bodied ruler. Glenn, the elf, Glenn Dwyer, I don't know, the elf person. We didn't talk to them at all. Apparently, though, they grow into a powerful archer by their own choices and preferences, not through elven culture pressure. And then Ulrika is listed here as well, as someone who was literally being repressed by Queen Diza and her men and whatnot, and then we helped her break free of that as well, and now is in Harv. I think we could also add Hugo to this, although not in my game's Hugo, but I think Hugo would also apply to this. Rather than generating choices which create vastly different outcomes, the sequel forces on a more rigid storytelling structure. Characters must escape forms of containment or impression, whether major or minor, and discover a world that they can make their own choices in. The lack of choices in the sequel's quests are intentional. Often quests only have one route to success, and the only other route is to fail. Very rarely do you find one that gives you a genuine choice that changes the outcome of the quest story. This is the current world of Dragon's Dogma 2 and of its cycle, a world ruled by fate and its predestined outcomes. The dragon in Dragon's Dogma 2 has been heavily memed on for how pathetic his dialogue appears compared to Grigori in DD1, but he perfectly summarizes the problem of this world. So this is what Dragon, DD2's dragon, says, in contrast to Grigori's honestly, truthfully inspiring speech where he's saying, don't forget, you're here because you made it here. You were strong enough and to stand here on your own 2 feet. So now fight me. And and you better fight strong. It's not destiny. It's not fate that determines what's going to happen. It's just your own will, right? Because he's meant to shepherd in a new god, so he can't hold back. Now listen to what our dragon says. We must fulfill our charges. I as the dragon, and thou as the arisen. The world shall not change with my death, nor shall it change with thine. Arisen, pitiable soul tossed by the whims of fate. I don't know why he doesn't go. I think he goes on to talk more about it at some other place, but this line is like a direct opposite of, where does he say that? I don't, well, really of Grigori's whole concept of what he's saying. Our dragon is saying we're a pitiable soul, tossed by the whims of fate, as in we just happened to end up here, just through fate. We could have done nothing, and we would have ended up getting tossed here just because fate willed it, And it's like, what? That is literally the opposite of true. These themes are in direct opposition to DD1, where the Arisen's choices bring them to battle the dragon. This theme of a repressed cycle is reinforced by the time-limited post-game content. I did learn how this works, by the way. And the way it works is you get 12 rests, basically. You get 12 days. Whether or not you use a wake stone to like heal yourself back up, and you don't have to rest, and blah, blah, blah. And you can technically go for a lot longer than what would be 12 days if you didn't stop playing in the real world and time would continue normally. You can go on forever, but 12 resting days. Which I think is also why it gave us the option to start at day 6, which is like halfway. So we were on day like, we were almost out of time. In opposition to DD1's Everfall, the Arisen of DD2 must contend with constantly advancing Void, which devours the map piece by piece. Even if they delay the end by fighting, they will find out that they can no longer rest peacefully, which is what the message says on day 12 if you try to rest. They are doomed to exhaust themselves until death or until they confront the maker of fate. Only after a while, right, and they're saying, only after a while the player base realizes you can stay in the unmoored world forever by healing yourself with items. They say they don't think this design was by accident. The Arisen can only maintain themselves in the unmoored world by continuing to temper the strength of their will through battle. So that's their little kind of wink wink nudge nudge there. In the world of DD2, the original cycle, a true cycle filled with freedom and fueled by volition, is broken. Instead exists a cycle in which every outcome is predetermined. A being that creates a predetermined path and manually interferes with the world's denizens to ensure that this fate occurs exactly as they wish. The will of this world, left directly behind to merely watch from the outside the cycle, has instead stepped into it with good intentions, directly interfering and damaging the world almost beyond repair. This being, who has made a mockery of the cycle by enslaving its people under the yoke of oppressive lives and a meaningless cycle of existence, yet still sees itself as the world's benevolent savior. The Pathfinder is the false benevolence, which is what our dragon says somewhere. Part 2. We will get to part 2 in a moment. I am going to go use the restroom. The plan is to skim part 2 as well, and then go into my notes to wrap it up. And then we'll see what time it is, and see what we feel like doing, chat. BRB. Thanks for hanging out so far. Hopefully it's making sense. Yeah, BRB. I'm back. I also made a cup of tea. Let's see. We got an emote. How many of these can we add? I guess we'll find out. Oh, wait. But this one is just if you type the... Okay, people are gonna type this one by accident. That's okay. We'll get a different one or change it. I thought there was... I don't know if it's that website, but there was one where I could change the wording myself, which I thought was cool. I can change to okay. 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 I'll change it later. No big deal. I guess if people do type okay and it changes to that, it really won't be a big deal versus sometimes what happens to me in other channels. Okay. I'm out of breath. I'm out of breath from going up the stairs. Oh god. Jesus. Okay. Point is, the TLDR of part 1. The world the world exists. Duh. It's always gonna die. Something at some point said, I don't like that, and created the cycles to stop it from happening. We can refer to the process of the world progressing towards oblivion as the true cycle, because that's just what always happens. And we call the cycles wherein someone becomes essential and helps and gives the world more fuel to keep going for new stuff to happen before it dies as an individual cycle. We know there's some differences between tone between our dragon and Grigori. We know that the Pathfinder is not as benevolent as they may think they are, interfering with things, corrupting the test, but also messing around with the cycle. We have our current Seneschal, King Rathias, who's being a pouty baby at the bottom of the ocean. And he's not continuing the individual cycle, which means the world is going to end, right? The world is going to end without continuing the true cycle properly, as in progressing, because he's not fueling it. And we're going to die. And then it's going to start over. And then guess what's going to happen? The same thing. And then we're going to die. So on and so on and so on and so on until something different happens, which we'll get to. Part 2, A Mirrored God. I do appreciate the cool titles for the sections. There are those who, so in this, though I wish you would say who these quotes are from, luckily, I'm a nerd and I know. This is from Sivan, when he was the Pathfinder. Pathfinder. This is from Sivan. That's a big misspeak. From Sivan when he was the Seneschal. When we asked him, who are you? He said, there are those who would call such a being a maker or God. I can't deny the claim any more than I can affirm it. In the end, they are but words. So, I do remember the point of this section now, and I do think it's interesting. It's more only if you understand, or if you were a part of DD1, or understood and saw DD1's ending, specifically around how Sivan acts as the Seneschal. So let's read. Even though the Pathfinder is the antagonist of the story, they don't believe that they're evil. They think that the character who is at fault for breaking the state of the world is King Rathias. I do kind of have to agree. King Rathias is definitely the one that said, wah wah, watching one, I don't like someone watching me, I quit. And that's the end of the world. In conversations with King Rathias, he never says that he feels the watching one controlled his actions or choices. The Watching One's role is to observe the world to ensure that the cycle continues, and may even derive entertainment from the stories within it. Unfortunately, King Matthias's pride was the downfall of this world. He could not stomach being he could not stomach a being higher than him. He compares his ascension to the throne beyond the rift to a wooden crown after his discovery of the Watching One. King Matthias is an interesting character when compared with Sivan from the first game. Imagine if Sivan was in King Matthias's place. How would he have reacted of learning of the Watching One? In their opinion, Sivan is a truly humble and selfless person. He refers to the position of Seneschal as steward, and will not call the position that of a god or maker, even though he may be considered one. Even at the end of his tenure, he kneeled before the Arisen and refers to himself as a servant. He says, I ask that you, as the world's new Seneschal, use it now to vouchsafe freedom for your weary servant. Right? So, isn't that really is, to me, an interesting point. Sivan is so dutiful with it all. And I remember even now, when after he fights us, he's like, I'm sorry. He's like, you have to forgive me, Arisen, but know that it was all the test, and now I'll answer any questions you have, right? I mean, how much more, what more could you ask for, really, Of course, there's much more depth to Svan, but how would their reactions differ in the face of the Watching One? Would he have reacted with shame and arrogance as King Matthias did? While Sivan views himself as a helpless servant, King Matthias views himself as a victorious conqueror, one that is depicted as always seeking glory. He says, I despaired at this discovery for his... Okay, this is just his line, King Matthias' line, talking about how he is despairing at the existence of the Watching One. When met with the reality that a being more powerful than he existed, a being so powerful that it could live outside of the cycle, unattached from the world, King Matthias despaired. His victories were now a farce and became so unmotivated that he abandoned his duties. Rather than act as a servant to the people, he used his powerful will to return to the mortal plane with his throne and selfishly rule as King of Vermund. When new Arisen arrived to relieve him of his duty, he did not treat them as an honored candidate, but instead conquered them by cutting them down without mercy. I don't think it would be unpopular to say that Sivan would not react to the knowledge of the Watcher with prideful disappointment, but with humility. He may even respect that the cycle's existence is safeguarded even beyond his own duty as Seneschal. Even with this knowledge, he would continue the cycle and allow the Arisen to be tested on equal grounds, not as an all-powerful being slaughtering the mortal Arisen. King Matthias is a mirror image of Sivan, and I believe King Matthias' prideful reaction is the true inciting incident of this world's story. A great take on the comparison between the two Seneschal. Does it have any factual any real relevance to understanding the true ending or not? It does paint a worse picture or a better picture of how wrong or how misguided King Matthias' actions led everything to become. And, well, that's not right. Comparing the two really helps you see the difference between this fake cycle and what could be called a true individual cycle. So scrolling down, the perception of the audience. In well-made stories, there are no meaningless characters. If Matthias is at fault for the state of the world, then why do we kill the Pathfinder? Let's go back to a particular line from the Japanese ending. The dragon, through great will, caused flux and nothingness, slowing down annihilation. The original Japanese dialogue conveys that a strong will was born from oblivion, and a great will granted it the role of dragon. The dragon, by order of the great will, caused flux and nothingness, slowing down annihilation. But what is flux and nothingness? The user that translated these lines for me elaborated on the idea of flux. So in this case, they mean not a flux of just like a womp, like a whoop, a little one-off flux in a line, like a little line, and it goes across like beep boop, you know, not like that, but a flux like a never-ending, constant thing that's causing a disruption. Without this unending change, oblivion would slowly creep in, eating away at the world until nothing remains. The flux being the cycle, the thing that never stops, the thing that is always in change and evolving, etc. That is the thing that's staving off oblivion, which we know is absolutely true because, again, going back to the model of there's a universe, there's a world, stuff happens, it dies, there's the world, the cycle happens, it goes on for longer, then it dies. In this, it's saying that flux, the cycle, the stuff of constant change, keeps the world alive, the true cycle alive. Because without it, oblivion creeps in, eating away the world until nothing remains. Okay, I'm gonna skip his comparison about it being a pot of boiling water because I think it's just gonna confuse you guys even more because I have different comparisons later. Okay. I don't know who says this quote, but it sounds this line of the world thirsts for the will to live. That's definitely very true because the world is dying. With King Rathias' energy running out, right? So when when the Pathfinder saw that Rathias has abandoned his role, the Watching One sought to take his place to ensure the safety of the world continue the cycle. In their lack of understanding, the Watching One, now turned Pathfinder/guide, created a story of their own. A story that must play out in the exact manner they had written it. Rather than creating the pieces of the story and allowing the characters to make their own decisions, to show and temper their own will, Pathfinder has suppressed any option of volition or will, and in doing so has doomed this world. So, with the Pathfinder's false cycle, the world is unable to make its own choices, and with the Arisen unable to show their will, the world is stagnating and oblivion is encroaching. The cycle created by the Pathfinder are like glowing cinders that can barely maintain the pot of... I'm skipping that. It's moments away from collapsing and sending this world back into stagnation, aka oblivion, which we can see. We see that happen at the end of the game. That's what the end of the world looks like. When the world's about to go into oblivion, oblivion made manifest to me is the brine. Doesn't seem like a far outreach when it's a literal lore creature that consumes everything. Those creatures clearly commanded and were themed around the brine in some way, but get back to that again later. The Unmoored World is the only sequence in the game that shows the world is no longer within the constraints of the false cycle. Pathfinder is no longer watching the world. It reveals just how fragile the world King Rathias' pride and Pathfinder's mythos-guided benevolence has created. The Pathfinder's belief that everyone has a role, and if they stray away, the world will come to an end, is a belief they may not have had while watching, but may have developed due to this poor sham of a cycle. The true source of the Pathfinder's misguided belief of this system of roles most likely stems from the Rivage Elder, or one of his predecessors. The Rivage Elder was a previous Arisen that nearly broke the Pathfinder's false cycle and liberated this world. However, he fell in the Unmoored World and was unable to complete his goal. The Pathfinder's experience of having an Arisen break their role in this false cycle and witnessing how how close Oblivion was to wiping out the world instilled in them the idea that the cycle is fragile and needs to be guided, and the Pathfinder tries to convince the Arisen of this. I think it's incredible that they don't mention the cutscene that we saw. I would be blown away if they came to this conclusion without seeing that cutscene. But yes, it is pretty. There's lots of hints that he's an Arisen, but that's why he wasn't on our map marker, perhaps, right? Because he's not an Arisen of our world, but from another one. Somehow, dying in the unmoored world sends you to another. It sends you to another world. That part unclear on like why that happens, but another example of the Pathfinder being like, oh my god, you see what happens when people they go against what I want them to do. The world gets fucked up. So I think that's another reason. I don't think this guy mentions it, but that's why the Pathfinder is so set on us sitting on the throne. Once we win, he's like, oh, why are you talking to me? What do you want? What could you possibly want? Shouldn't you be on the throne? Blah, blah, blah. To me, I thought that was our choice, our kind of pre-seneschal choice, but it kind of wasn't. He wanted us to fulfill our role that he had in his mind. And even if we did that, that doesn't solve the fact that the seneschal, King Rathias, isn't doing his job. It makes zero sense to want to sit us on the throne, especially when, at that point, we would be the true Arisen, because we had killed the dragon. So the Pathfinder, what he's wanting to happen, doesn't even make sense, unless I'm missing something. Continuing on. Despite the overwhelming suppression of their volition, our Arisen has a will that is the greatest the world has seen in many turns of this false cycle. We're going back to the because I told you so, because I'm just that strong category, but it's really, I think, just true. We, as the character, are very powerful in terms of our will. Perhaps rivaling even King Rathias in power, even while suppressed at every turn, while unable to display control in nearly any decision, our Arisen's will is immense. So powerful that the Arisen is able to bestow upon their pawn a lesser will of their own. That pawn, being born from and closest to Oblivion, is the first to show the signs of falling into stagnation, depicted as turning into a writhing dark mass in the shape of a small dragon. Using this newfound will, our pawn is able to make its own choice at the end of the unmoored world to resist Oblivion and set the world right. So, in my point, this is another point that the Pathfinder has to be wrong. If pawns... There's actually a specific line that he says. Never mind, I'll get back to that later. The Arisen plunges the God's Bane blade into the heart of the Pathfinder, the current seneschal, sacrificing their physical form to become a new seneschal, repairing the world cycle back to its true form, aka finally fixing the messed up cycle that the Pathfinder has created and King Rathias have created, and then seeing what the true ending of the game, the Sven everyone moving on with their lives, true progress happening. A sacrifice that the dragon had been hoping for. So they talk about how an interesting part in the beginning where the dragon was going to choose Ulrika and then instead decided to choose us. Which I will comment. I keep saying this. It will hopefully make sense too later, but I will comment on that again later. So we stabbed the Pathfinder with the God's Bane blade. 7 showed us the way. Stabbed him. This is what he says. Nothingness, vanishing, and annihilation. With this, everything ends. How frustrating, even though are about to begin again, a new world, story to see. But I no longer that role. So he knows. He knows that things are progressing, right? He's mad that he won't be able to see the new world that's coming. It's odd that it's like he understands now, but maybe he realized too late, kind of a thing. By slaying the Pathfinder, an unquantifiable amount of change occurs in the system of the world. The world reels back from its stagnation all at once and enters a state of immense flux. Oblivion is pushed back as the world enters a new era filled with will. The true cycle has been restored. Pathfinder has been killed by the cycle, and the cycle, along with the world, may now exercise its own freedom. So then they go on to talk about the brine. Um, so their explanation of, well, first they said, they're thinking, yeah, the brine might have just been a technical limitation kind of thing for games back in the day, yada yada yada, aka no need to add swimming and blah blah blah. But if you kind of think about it, I guess like it's not like that they just made the screen fade to black. They still had to add an animation of weird tentacle things coming out of the water and sucking you away, and it's not necessarily a simple looking thing, but what do I know? Maybe that's still easier than animating swimming. So even if that's true, their point is that they expanded on the brine within this game. And this is something that we saw. I don't remember if this was at the beginning or not, but we see our brine fog here. And we did see this, such a thing, here at the end of the game. It was like splashing and going all crazy. I believe the fountain above is a tool to measure the amount of oblivion in the world. It is a tool of the Watcher to contain the cycle to a defined portion of the world. When the will of the world is not strong enough, spreading it thin may hinder its survival. By enshrouding the world in brine, the Watcher is able to compress all the participants of the cycle together, ensuring the greatest amount of change will occur in the fastest amount of time. AKA, they're saying that their speculation is that the Watching One uses the brine to keep everyone on one continent, one area, so that way they can get the cycle going more quickly and more efficiently. And also, presumably, because if everyone lived all across the lands, that would take a lot more will to contribute towards draining the Seneschal even faster, because there are more people. But again, that's also more speculation. But still, cool to think about. Okay, they go on to talk about, I apologize, but we will not be reading their theories about yin and yang, and we will not be going into the real life implications. But I will skim over the conclusion for whatever they feel is a proper conclusion. If you made it this far, thank you so much for reading. Oh, now I feel bad that we skipped the last two parts. I have my own notes to go through. I apologize. Not everyone will agree with this interpretation, but that's all right. It's highly possible I may have misinterpreted some dialogue or even some events of the game. There are plenty of things I didn't touch on, such as Talos, the Batal mages. I wonder what that's about. The dragon statuette, and the sheer amount of the Risen that still live. And beyond these, there may be even more info that will be revealed as we play through the game. And then they give some thanks. Shout out to Mephisto FN, I suppose, for the translations, and Sushi Enjoyer again. They're actually the one that inspired him to do all of this, which is cool. All right. Thank you, Lenarius, in the Dragon's Dogma Reddit. And now, chat room, prepare your eyes. It's time for my notes. Here we go. Keep in mind, some of this stuff we've already covered, so it might be a little repetitive. I'll try to skip that bit. Solar flare! I saw more interesting DBZ lore the other day. I was also thinking I probably should have fact-checked that Sonic thing that I talked about, but you know what? Let's just hope that it's true. If it's not true, it's still kind of funny, I guess. All right. So keep in mind, chat, the Dragon's Dogma is super clear on some stuff and very vague on others, in case you haven't noticed. But yes, so again, I'm kind of going over what I've been talking about, but let's define some stuff. The universal hierarchy, aka the way the whole shebang works, is there's time itself. Just time exists as a thing. There's the world's true cycle and its progress, which is the overall measure of cycles for Oblivion. There's an individual cycle progress as well, which are the events of DD1 and DD2 and other stuff, just all the stuff that happens in life, basically. So this diagram on the right, this is how I thought the world worked at first, was like, you have a start and then an end. This is actually how the world worked until the Great Will said, I don't like this. And so the Great Will made a cycle, right? He made the cycle, which extended the life of everything before eventually going to Oblivion again. And then I realized that model's not exactly correct either. And it's more like this. It starts here, and then it goes, and then a cycle happens, and if a new central, everything works out, new stuff happens. Then same thing, over and 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 over. At any point, everything could die, and it would restart here, over and 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 over. So it's this really weird mix of everything that happens once is going to happen again, but also everything that happens, you have free will to do whatever you want. It's a really weird mix of both of those things, and I probably still won't be able to explain it very well to you guys, but you can imagine every cycle, every individual cycle is adding a chain to this ring, right? And it just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes. So what would happen in this model if somebody, some big poopy pants said, I don't want to do this anymore? It would just stop, and we would hit the end, and then Oblivion, the white circle, death, dead. I've already talked about this, the TLDR, the world exists, things happen in Oblivion. That's kind of what we just talked about. We've talked about how the multiverse is technically confirmed through pawns, because we can download each other's pawns, and the fact that in the DD1 online ending, you face off against other Arisen that have beaten the game, and if all that, and also potentially great dragons, aka the dragons that choose Arisen, come from other universes, because they kind of has to, I think, for stuff to make sense. Okay. Whew. Anyways, we've talked about the watching one and stuff a lot already. I'll skip over that note. Here are the notes regarding how the Pathfinder is wrong. He had a note talking about how pawns didn't have a purpose anymore and are doomed to fade into nothing, and how there's no worse fate than Oblivion. But we know, I don't have the picture there of that quote, but we know that that's not true, because Seven literally broke free of her destiny, right? Got her own will and ended up saving the whole world, the true world. Seven took on the job of an Arisen. She really, that is, if that is not the sheer opposite of someone's life fading into nothingness, then did Seven have Dragon's Plague or get her own free will? Apparently, that always just happens. Your pawn will get infected with the Dragon's Plague, and that is just what happens when you get Dragon's Plague. You turn into a dragon and kill people. I believe what the difference is, what happens at the end is that she got her own will and was able, and fought against it and helped us, and that's also why she like flies away, and then she comes back, she's like, Master, and then we grab onto her and fly off. But if you get Dragon's Plague from a pawn, This is no joke. I'm glad that you asked that. If you get Dragon's Plague, I haven't seen it, but I think pretty sure from a pawn in your game ahead of the game, then ahead of the story, right? Then it turns into a dragon and kills everyone in a town. You see a cutscene and it kills everything. And they're like, you can use their Eternal Wake Stone for an easy achievement to revive a bunch of people back if that happens. And I was like, what the? So if they get Dragon's Plague, they literally kill everyone in a town. That's insane. Um. So yeah, I don't think it's typical for them to get their free will, right? Um. Craziness. There's another line from so about the Pathfinder being misguided. There's a line from the dragon, not Grigori, but our dragon, who says, "Thou shalt cut a swath through the false benevolence enshrouding this world," aka the Pathfinder's attempt at the Pathfinder's attempt at fixing everything, his false benevolence. We've already talked about the Rivage Elder, and I've already talked about how the peace ending's not really peace because the first king, the situation with the first king not doing his job as the Seneschal is not even solved. So all that points to the Pathfinder just being a dummy. Also, don't forget that the theme of this whole game is willpower and dragons. Because I kept thinking to myself, I was like, wait, why does Seven turn into a shadow dragon? And I was like, wait, why is it called Dragon's Plague? And I was like, I don't know, man. I think at some point you just got to say it's just dragon stuff. It's like, why did they become dragons anyway? It's like, I don't know. They could have become anything, but it's Dragon's Dogma. I don't know. It's just a theme, you know. All right. So from this point, chat, we have all of this random floating around info. I'm gonna paint to you how I feel the world started, but also the cycle, like the typical cycle process. So here we go. Skipping over my little note. This is just, yeah, whatever. At the beginning, the Great Will created itself through the sheer willpower to stave off oblivion, and it took the form of a great dragon. You might think, wouldn't it make sense for him just to create a Seneschal, or for him to be a Seneschal? And I answer you preemptively, possibly, but you can argue that they're already a Seneschal because they're the Great Will, or even above the status of one. Also, you need a will forged through trials to be a proper dragon, one that is capable of selecting a potentially good Arisen. And two, even if he were to become the Seneschal of the first cycle, he would still need to create a dragon to go and find an Arisen. So he just kind of skipped a step and took the form of a dragon. The Great Will becomes a dragon. And the Great Will dragon begins the first cycle. So what does that look like? Step one. Step one. A new Arisen is selected. If the Arisen gives up, you just repeat step one. A new Arisen gets selected by the same dragon. If they continue, go to step two. So we adventure. And then, if we fail and die before facing the dragon, the dragon picks a new Arisen. If we fail and die against the dragon picks a new Arisen. If we fail and die after defeating the dragon, but before killing the Seneschal, we go to step one. If all the dragons are interdimensional, aka they can come from other cycles, or we go to step 7 if not. So I think the real answer is just a new dragon would appear and it would begin again. But I don't know for sure. So it's possible because, you know, if we die in the game, we don't always get to see what happens. Sometimes we do, but not always. We go a game over screen. We get a this tale has ended screen, right? So we could either start over or go to step 7, which is that the world ends. The cycle is broken. This tale has ended. The world is lost to oblivion until it's born again and repeats until it can be continued properly. Again, that's what happens if you were to kill the dragon, but then die before the central, which is kind of what happened to us in our game. Except we didn't... I guess we didn't die. So, if you survive, and you meet the dragon, and you take the dragon's deal, the dragon leaves, and then you go back to step 1. A new arisen is selected. We saw that in DD1. If they resist the dragon's deal, they finally get to move on to step 3. Step 3 is that the arisen kills the dragon, and they get the God's Bane Blade. Pretty simple. There's really nothing else there. Step 4, they do battle with the Seneschal. So in the first cycle, this doesn't happen. I got really confused by this for a moment until I realized, yeah, that it can't happen because there is no previous Seneschal. He's the first one. So there can't be a battle with one. Whomever defeated the first dragon ascended, and they became the Seneschal. We would kind of think, does that invalidate their test of will? Maybe, because they're missing out on a step. But does that mean that it's not possible? No, it had to have happened, because otherwise the world just wouldn't continue. It would the Great Will would start the first cycle, and then it would flitter out, and then that would be it. I mean, maybe that even happened a couple times, but it had to have continued at some point. If you're battling the Seneschal as an Arisen and in the other cycle, you have some options. You can take the Seneschal's deal and live in peace, which means you either go to step 6 or 7. Step 6 being... wait. It should just be go to step 7. Dang it. Alright. Against the battle, against the Seneschal, in a normal cycle, where the Arisen does have to face the Seneschal, if you take the deal, and you live in peace, you doom the world forever. And that's what happened in DD1, because we got a game over screen as soon as we did that, right? Well, we got to run around, and then we got a game over screen. If you resist the Seneschal's deal, and you fight him, and die against him, you go to step 6. Which is that you're a failed Arisen, and you get reborn as a dragon, either in the same or a different cycle. And then you go back to step 1. And then I have some notes here about... just some notes to myself about... Is it a same cycle or a different cycle? I don't know. And I just decided it is both. It can be both. Yeah, evidence seems to say that both are possible. The DD1 ending and Bitter Black Isle support same universe dragon concepts. But how are the Arisen chosen after one succeeds? So I'm saying, DD1 and Bitter Black Isle, we see ourselves turn into a dragon, and we didn't play Bitter Black Isle. That's the DLC of DD1. But Gret, she is a failed Arisen that turns into a dragon, comes back, and we can confirm it's in the same universe because the same people meet her again. So at least same universe is possible, but then I think, what happens after an Arisen becomes a Seneschal, and then when does a dragon appear? How does that happen? Because there's no new Arisen going to go challenge this newly crowned Seneschal, because they would have to be chosen by a dragon who doesn't exist, because the dragon already chose an Arisen who just became the Seneschal. So that's when the whole dragons have to come from other universes as well, other cycles as well. Otherwise, every one of them would just end. Going back. If the Arisen's facing the Seneschal, and he wins. Also, wait. The reason why you turning into a dragon only happens when you die against the Seneschal, in my mind, is because you're the most well-equipped to find a well-suited Arisen at this point. You're one step away from it, so the hope is that you will be able to identify a similar will, a stronger will, or find out what you were missing, right? What the one thing might have been. If you win against the Seneschal, you release the existing one from their duty. Go to step 5. Hooray! You did it. Yay! During that time, the Seneschal reign. During this time, your will supply the world with energy needed to avoid oblivion. And in 2 different ways. The like end of the world oblivion, and also the give people free will and appoint to life kind of oblivion. But eventually, the Seneschal dies, which is go to step 7. Or the Seneschal is defeated and concedes, which is go to step 8. So if the Seneschal dies, go to step 7, the world ends. Again, the cycle's broken, the tale is ended. That's what happened. That's what would have happened if King Rathias died and no one could do anything about it. It just would have ended. Or if the Seneschal is defeated and concedes, go to step 8, which means the world continues. The true cycle has been given the will to continue for now until a new dragon appears from another individual cycle. So, going back to the overall progress, we just walked through the steps of one of these little cycles, one of these little circles, and now the world is good to move on until the next one happens, until the next one, and the next one, and so on and so on. Literally, hopefully, and forever staving off oblivion, while also simultaneously understanding that that's impossible, and succumbing to oblivion again and again and again and again. Yes. So, my conclusion that I will simply read. What does all this mean in relation to DD2? Looking at the surface, we freed ourselves from the cycle, and humanity can progress without the Watching One's influence. But that was never the real issue of the world. Our world was on the verge of death in DD2 due to King Rathias' refusal to continue the cycle. We can see oblivion itself coming to consume our world. Literal physical depictions aside, the bosses of the unmoored land were themed around the brine, an all-consuming force that annihilates everything. I explain why. I talk about why did it happen? He became aware of the Watching One and became angry at his presence. Feeling that he was simply an actor on the stage, he returned to the physical world and became the Mad Sovereign. He was still the Seneschal and was refusing to continue the cycle. We must assume there's only one active Seneschal at any moment, which is somewhat backed by DD1's online New Game Plus ending, meaning that no one in any iteration of the individual cycles that have been happening are creating dragons, as the world's true cycle progress is currently stuck with King Rathias. The Watching One takes action. In conjunction with evidence from Laris's Reddit post, I feel like the Watching One did create the dragon. It explains its attitude towards the cycle, and it may explain why there are so many arisen around. The scenarios happened many, many times, confirmed by the dragon itself and the Rivage Elder's existence. With each cycle, more arisen are added to the list to try to dethrone King Rathias, an artificial, weak-willed dragon in charge of selecting arisen to combat what may be one of the strongest willed creatures in all of time. Seems like a recipe for failure, and is. I erased this part, but I want to question some of the arisen that were chosen by Dragon. An oracle, an old woman oracle. A lazy, drunken man, aka Lamond, aka Luz and Lamond. You know, the Mystic Spearhand, I'm not sure what his deal was, one of the 3 reasons that he didn't fight, but it seems maybe he just wasn't strong enough. Point is, it's questionable on some of the choices. It could have only been more obvious if they had chosen literal children as an arisen too. I agree with Lunarius' statements about why we were chosen as an arisen, since we protected Ulrika, and I feel that it may be linked with King Rathias' dialogue about how we didn't seem to want to kill him. I feel like that really stood out to me whenever we approached him and he said, "Oh, you here to kill me, blah blah blah, why aren't your weapons drawn?" He said, "Something's different about you," and then he gave us the literal most important artifact in the entire world. Pretty big deal. I don't think he just did that on a whim. I think there's a bit of a theme around protecting. You know, the end game is centered around protecting people as well. And what does that mean overall? I can't say for sure. Maybe it's that a strong will is not enough, but compassion and the desire to protect others is vital to a better future. I got on my little soapbox there for a second. But all I know is that the trouble seems to be over. King Matthias finally faded. The Watching One may have assumed the role of Seneschal. Or we could have inherited the title technically once King Matthias gave us the Godsbane. Either way, the Watching One was influencing the world much too heavily and corrupted the individual cycle. By removing them, and coincidentally with the passing of King Matthias, we have enabled the true cycle to continue. We can see the events after the Unmoored Land are continuations of what transpired before, and all is well again. Yay! All right. How was that? I hope that better paints how the ending was meant to be. Because truthfully, I do feel like it was saved by understanding the translation errors and a bit more of an and then, you know, some thoughtful words from around how the Pathfinder is acting. I don't think I would have picked that up at all. Capcom. It was pretty good. Yeah, it's like yeah. I'm still pretty thirsty for knowledge, but at the same time, I kept asking myself as I was reading all this stuff, like, what am I looking for? How do I know when I'm done reading stuff? And I said, when I feel like satisfied with what happened in the game. And yes, it does make sense. The cycle being corrupted by what definition you want to say, it doesn't matter, but it was definitely messed up, and we fixed it. We fixed it through magic RPG stuff. Wow. I think that was the TLDR right at the end there in like 10 seconds. I think I just wrapped it all up there. Nice. Well, let's see. It's 2 hours before Beep Snoot's birthday, but she's just watching Space Jam. No offense, but I don't really do the watch party things. I don't know how to do that. Where is that? I have never seen Space Jam, so I could be convinced to watch it, but also I kind of don't want to watch it. Have you seen Space Jam, Sweet? Are you familiar with Space Jam? It's the Why are you laughing? It's the basketball movie with Looney Tunes. You know what they should watch? Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Yeah, that was a good one too. Okay. 1 second. I'm gonna end the stream and start it back up again. That way I can split the VOD up. Thank you all for listening to my Dragon's Dogma nerd out. I appreciate it. See you in a second.